Something about the way Meghan Markle's voice echoed down that Amazon MGM hallway made even the most seasoned security officer freeze for half a second. It wasn't just loud. It wasn't just angry. It carried a sharp, cracking force that said, this wasn't a tantrum. This was a full-blown detonation. And the strangest part? 5 minutes earlier, everything had looked calm. Almost too calm. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But at Amazon MGM Studios, calm doesn't last long. Not when Meghan Markle is making her official return to acting. Not when a multi-million-dollar project is on the line. And definitely not when one unexpected exchange sparks an explosion that sends crew members ducking behind equipment and forces security to step in. Before we go deeper, ask yourself one question. What could possibly push a duchess, a mother, a public figure who understands how carefully the world watches her, to get physically escorted out of a Hollywood studio screaming at the top of her lungs? It's a haunting question, a heavy question, a question with more layers than you would ever expect. And today, we're peeling every one of those layers back. Because this wasn't just an outburst. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a bad moment caught on camera. According to people who were inside the building, this was the moment Meghan Markle's return to acting cracked open at the seams. The moment her carefully controlled narrative slipped. The moment that the real, raw, unfiltered version of Meghan collided violently with the pressure-filled world of Hollywood. A world she thought she had conquered years ago. But Hollywood remembers. And it does not forgive easily. Let's rewind. Picture this. Amazon MGM Studios, buzzing like a beehive. Actors running lines in corners. Assistants sprinting with clipboards. Lights flickering to life in sound stages. Costume racks wheeling through narrow hallways. The sound of rehearsals, laughter, arguments, last-minute script adjustments. The usual chaos of a major production. Yet something felt different today. Because today wasn't just any production day. Today was Meghan Markle's official welcome back moment. Her grand re-entry into the industry she once walked away from. The moment that was supposed to show Hollywood a polished, evolved, rebranded Meghan, refined by royal life, hardened by public scrutiny, softened by motherhood, fueled by ambition. But ambition cuts both ways. And when it rubs against ego, insecurity, or unresolved tension, it sparks. The alarms didn't start with yelling. They started with whispers. Crew members exchanging glances. Assistants quietly texting each other. One producer pacing with their hand over their mouth. A stylist silently gathering hairpins from the makeup chair and walking away without a word. These were the early signs. The tremors before the earthquake. But like all tremors, they were easy to ignore until they weren't. Meghan had arrived on set earlier that morning with a kind of energy people described as charged. She moved quickly, spoke sharply, observed everything around her, as if the whole studio was one giant test she had been preparing to take for years. It made sense in a way. After all, this wasn't just a cameo. This wasn't just a role. This was a comeback story, the kind Hollywood loves, but only when it goes perfectly. And Meghan needed this one to go perfectly. Her Netflix projects were aging out of relevance. Her podcast deal had evaporated. Public sympathy had faded. The Hollywood illusion of unlimited future potential was starting to thin. This film was supposed to be a corrective, a revival, a rebranding, a clean slate. But what happens when the pressure for perfection becomes unbearable? What happens when people around you don't play their part the way you expect? What happens when the industry you once walked away from no longer sees you as a star returning home, but as a wild card returning to chaos? That's exactly what happened inside Amazon MGM Studios. Hours before the screaming incident, something small, almost invisible, began chipping at Meghan's composure. A single comment from a crew member. A misunderstanding over her schedule. A remark about camera angles that she didn't appreciate. People close to the situation say she was simmering long before lunchtime. They say you could see it in the tightness of her jaw, the way she kept adjusting her blazer, the way she responded to perfectly normal questions with clipped answers, the way her phone buzzed and she looked away from it instantly, as if refusing to let anyone see whatever message rattled her. And then came the spark. A line spoken by someone on the production team. Not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to slice through the building's noisy atmosphere. We don't know the exact words yet. That reveal comes later, but we do know this. Meghan stopped walking, turned, froze, then said something in a tone that turned nearby heads. It wasn't the yelling moment. Not yet, but it was the beginning of the unraveling. Still, even then, no one expected the day to spiral the way it did. No one expected voices to rise. No one expected security radios to crackle. No one expected doors to slam. No one expected the screaming. Especially not the kind of screaming described by one witness as unfiltered, uncontrolled, and definitely not meant for public ears. You might wonder, why didn't someone intervene earlier? Why didn't someone slow things down? Why didn't someone de-escalate the situation before it got so big? Because in Hollywood, confrontation is normal. Egos clash. Creative disagreements happen. People push back and forth. It's part of the job. But the difference here wasn't the disagreement. It was the intensity, the velocity, the pressure behind every word that came out of Meghan's mouth. People on set say she didn't just argue. She erupted. Not at a stranger, not at an assistant, but at someone she had been trying very hard to impress. Someone whose approval mattered. Someone whose opinion carried weight. Someone who wasn't prepared for the level of anger that flew in their direction. And here's the thing most people don't know yet. Meghan wasn't just yelling at one person. She was yelling at multiple people, and they were yelling back. Yes, yelling back. You don't hear that often in royal conversations. But Hollywood operates differently. When someone raises their voice, someone else usually raises theirs too. Calls were made. Producers were alerted. Security quietly positioned themselves nearby. Assistants started stepping backward. Crew members stopped pretending not to look. The hallway filled with tension so thick you could practically feel it in the air. Then came the moment. The moment when Meghan stepped too close to someone. Or someone stepped too close to her. Or one sentence, one unlucky sentence, dropped into the air like a match into gasoline. Observers don't agree on who said what, but they do agree on the reaction. Meghan's face hardened. Her shoulders tightened. Her voice rose into a sharp, cracking pitch that carried through the building. And security moved. Fast. Not running, but with purpose. With coordination. With clear training in how to handle situations that are escalating quickly. They called her name. They tried to calm her. They attempted to create space. They positioned their bodies between her and the others. But she wasn't calming. She wasn't slowing. She wasn't retreating. Instead, she shouted. And the hallway rang with words. Harsh words. That have since been repeated in whispers by people who were there. This wasn't royal decorum. This wasn't Hollywood charm. This wasn't measured public speaking control. This was raw. And when the shouting hit its peak, the cameras came out. Phones lifted. Screens glowed. Someone pressed record. Then another. Then another. The moment Meghan feared the most, losing control in front of cameras, had happened. And she knew it. Witnesses say her expression changed instantly. From fury, to realization, to panic. Security saw it too. And that's when they took the next step. They guided her away. Steered her down the hallway. Held her back from turning around again. Escorted her out of the active production area. A duchess. A Hollywood returnee. A public figure fighting for relevance. Being walked out like a liability. And she wasn't quiet about it. Outside the glass door, she shouted one last thing. A line so explosive that 3 people standing nearby looked at each other in absolute disbelief. A line that tells us this meltdown wasn't just about a comment, or a disagreement, or a misunderstanding. It was about something deeper. Much deeper. But the real shock? Someone behind that door filmed it. And they were ready to use the footage. Why did one comment set Meghan Markle off like a powder keg? That's the question everyone in the studio was asking moments before the hallway erupted. People who had worked with her before said they'd never seen her like this. And even the most experienced Hollywood veterans, people used to tantrums, diva behavior, and on-set chaos, were caught off guard. It all started innocuously enough. Crew members were adjusting cameras, lights hummed, and the scent of makeup and coffee filled the studio air. Meghan walked into the set, her posture flawless, her face composed, her gaze sharp. She carried herself with the kind of precision you'd expect from someone who had spent years under intense public scrutiny. Every step was measured, every glance deliberate. She wasn't just walking onto the set. She was staking her claim. And yet, something was off. Even seasoned assistants noticed it immediately. Her smile, while present, didn't reach her eyes. Her movements were quick, clipped. She scanned the crew with the intensity of someone calculating every possible slight, every judgment, every misstep. "You could feel it," said one unnamed crew member. She walked in, and the energy shifted. You didn't just notice it, you felt it. The air was tense. Everyone instinctively straightened up. Even the cameras seemed to pause. The first spark was subtle. A line from a production assistant about her positioning on camera. Not a criticism. Not even an overtly harsh remark. Simply a logistical note. But Meghan heard it differently. And when Meghan hears something differently, you'd better watch out. Her voice cut through the room like glass. Sharp, clear, unmistakable. "Excuse me," she said, not angrily at first, but with a tone that made it clear the comment had landed poorly. Heads turned. Whispers started. The room went quiet. Everyone knew the next moments would define the day. You could see the shift in her expression, another witness reported. Her lips tightened. Her jaw clenched. Her hands moved like she wanted to grab the person speaking, but stopped herself. And then she spoke again, louder, sharper. What followed was a series of verbal volleys that escalated almost instantaneously. Meghan, frustrated that her authority and image were being challenged, began firing off words at multiple people at once. Crew members, confused and alarmed, attempted to respond, to reason, to defuse. But she wasn't listening. She was too far gone, swept up in a storm that had been brewing all morning. It wasn't just her words. It was the intensity. Every syllable was punctuated with emotion, anger, frustration, disbelief, and a hint of fear. Fear that perhaps this comeback, this carefully planned return to acting, would unravel before it even began. And then came the first round of direct confrontations. Meghan singled out the director. He had dared suggest a minor adjustment in her blocking. A suggestion meant to enhance the scene's visual flow, nothing personal. But to Meghan, it was a challenge, a questioning of her capabilities. "You don't understand the scene," she reportedly shouted, her voice bouncing off the studio walls. "I know exactly how this works. Don't tell me how to move." The director froze, visibly stunned. In his 20-plus years of experience, he had dealt with difficult actors. But there was something different here. Something raw. Something personal. The crew tried to step in. Assistants approached cautiously, hands raised in non-threatening gestures. "Let's just take a moment," one said, her voice calm but firm. But Meghan didn't stop. She wasn't backing down. Every attempt to de-escalate only fueled the fire. Every calm suggestion was met with resistance, anger, and a rising volume. The echo of her voice ricocheted down the long studio corridor, drawing the attention of anyone within earshot. By now, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to electric. People were holding their breath. Cameras were rolling discreetly. Phones were lifted. Every movement was being recorded, whether intended or not. "Have you ever seen someone just lose control?" a crew member whispered to another. "I've worked on sets with divas. I've worked on sets with tantrums. But this was different. She wasn't performing. She was furious, and she was real." It didn't take long for the yelling to become more than just words. Meghan's gestures grew more pronounced. She was pointing, stepping closer, her body language a mix of authority and defiance. The line between confrontation and confrontation turned chaos blurred. Security, initially positioned at a distance, recognized the escalation. Radios clicked, walkie-talkies buzzed with urgent chatter. They moved closer, subtle but deliberate. Their presence alone did not stop her. Meghan, enraged and unwilling to surrender control, continued, each word sharper than the last. The tension reached a tipping point when Meghan was confronted by a co-star. This wasn't just an on-set disagreement. It was an emotional collision. The co-star reportedly said something meant to be lighthearted, possibly teasing, possibly challenging. Meghan interpreted it as a personal slight. And that's when the shouting intensified, erupting fully. The hallway vibrated with voices raised in anger, disbelief, and frustration. Crew members ducked behind props and cameras, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Assistants, once calm, were now scrambling to mediate, to prevent physical confrontation. Meghan's energy was undeniable. Even those who had criticized her in the past could see the force of her presence. Every word, every gesture was charged with emotion, a mix of fury, hurt, and fear. And just as the scene seemed about to reach its peak, security made the critical decision. 3 officers stepped forward, positioning themselves between Meghan and the others. They didn't rush. They didn't grab. They moved with authority and precision. Their goal was to escort, not escalate. But Meghan wasn't finished. Not yet. She pushed, she argued, she shouted. Phones raised, capturing every moment. Eyes widened. Witnesses whispered, some in disbelief, others in silent admiration at the raw intensity unfolding before them. It was at that moment, as security gently guided her toward the exit, that Meghan made one final, unforgettable outburst. A sentence so sharp, so loaded, it left the entire hallway frozen in silence for a heartbeat. No one expected it. No one predicted it. And everyone present knew they would be talking about it for years to come. But the most surprising part? This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because someone had recorded everything. Every shout, every gesture, every word. And the moment that footage spread beyond the studio walls, the real consequences began. Consequences that no one inside the hallway that day could have anticipated. A public meltdown. A royal-turned Hollywood figure. Security escorting her out. Phones recording every second. And an industry watching in stunned silence. You may think this is just a scandal. Just a Hollywood story. Just another diva moment. But the truth? It's much deeper. Much more revealing. And it all started with a single, small comment. One sentence that seemed harmless, ordinary even. But in that moment, it became the spark that ignited a storm no one could contain. Why is Meghan Markle risking it all to step back onto a Hollywood set? It's a question that has circulated in whispers across Hollywood long before the Amazon MGM incident. The answer, as insiders tell it, isn't just about money, or fame, or career revival. It's about control, image, validation, and, yes, the desperate need to prove that stepping away from Hollywood for royal life didn't cost her relevance, influence, or authority. For those who have been watching Meghan's trajectory closely, this comeback was always coming. Not as a subtle guest star, not as a quiet cameo. No, she intended to make a statement. A declaration. A full-scale return that would demand attention. And with close personal friends, she believed she had the perfect vehicle. Amazon MGM had promised her something rare. A film that positioned her in the center of the narrative, giving her the opportunity to shine in a role that showcased depth, emotional range, and star power. The role was complex, nuanced enough to show maturity, yet relatable enough to captivate a broad audience. In short, it was the perfect audition for Hollywood's perception of Meghan Markle, a redefined actress, confident, experienced, and untouchable. But Hollywood, as always, is complicated. It isn't just about talent, not even about star power. It's about alliances, trust, patience, and, most importantly, control. And that is where the friction begins. Inside the studio, people had been briefed extensively on Meghan's presence. She wasn't just any actor walking on a set. She was royalty. She was media dynamite. She was someone who could make or break a production's public perception before a single scene was shot. And that made her presence simultaneously valuable and volatile. According to insiders, Meghan's team had negotiated strict conditions for her appearance. She wanted creative input, approval over wardrobe choices, control over dialogue nuance, and a degree of influence that bordered on producer-level oversight. Amazon MGM agreed. Partly because they believed the publicity alone would justify any concessions, and partly because no one wanted to risk antagonizing a figure who could dominate headlines. Yet behind closed doors, not everyone on the crew was thrilled. People were whispering about how demanding she could be, one crew member said. But no one really knew the scale until we saw her on set. And seeing her on set was unlike anything Hollywood had encountered. There was an energy that demanded attention. Magnetic yet volatile. Every gesture, every glance, every small movement seemed loaded with intent. It was as if the room itself was responding to her presence. People leaned in. People flinched. Cameras captured moments that could have been innocuous, yet felt electric. For Meghan, this wasn't just about proving herself as an actor. It was about reclaiming narrative power. Her time in the royal spotlight had been a double-edged sword. On one hand, she had unmatched visibility and influence. On the other, her every action, every misstep, Every decision had been dissected, criticized, and turned into a public spectacle. To step back into acting without scrutiny? Impossible. But to step back in and control the narrative? That was the goal. Her motives were layered. Financially, this was important. After her Netflix projects cooled and other ventures showed mixed results, a successful acting comeback meant renewed marketability. Every appearance, every role, every review contributed to a larger perception of relevance. Hollywood pays attention to relevance, and relevance pays dividends. Emotionally, it was about redemption. She wanted audiences to see her not just as the figure in tabloids, but as an artist capable of commanding attention, embodying emotion, and creating intrigue. There was an almost desperate intensity in her preparation, a drive to prove that her hiatus had not diminished her talent or her presence. And strategically, there was visibility. Every paparazzi shot, every leaked clip, every whispered report contributed to the aura she was cultivating. Meghan understood optics like few others. Walking onto a set, cameras ready, lights buzzing, media listening, it was theater. It was performance. And yet, the irony was inescapable. Her meltdown, the very event that threatened to define her return, was also a form of theater. Whether intentional or not, it was magnifying her presence in a way nothing else could. But Hollywood doesn't forgive disruptions, even when they are dramatic, electrifying, or media gold. There are rules, unwritten but enforced with quiet precision. Disruption costs money. Disruption costs time. Disruption erodes trust. And in a world where schedules are tight, budgets are monitored to the last dollar, and PR fallout can destroy a project before it even opens, disruption is a serious liability. So why risk it? Because Meghan, at this moment, was balancing more than a single film. She was balancing reputation, ambition, and identity. She was attempting to reconcile the public's memory of a royal duchess with the image of a professional actress demanding autonomy. And that balancing act was precarious at best. Consider this. In preparation for her return, she had spent months studying scripts, refining delivery, and rehearsing movements with precision. But rehearsals in private differ from the intensity of a live set. In private, criticism is manageable. In a studio buzzing with expectations, cameras, and gossip, every misstep feels amplified. Every suggestion feels like a challenge. Every glance feels like judgment. And in Meghan's case, insiders say, the pressure was compounded by internal doubts. Even for someone used to public scrutiny, stepping back into Hollywood, where reputation is fragile and careers can pivot on perception alone, is a high-stakes gamble. And her emotional state, already heightened by years of media scrutiny, became a tinderbox. You may be wondering, was anyone on the production team prepared for this? Some were. Many weren't. And that difference in readiness would prove pivotal. Executives had hoped her professionalism would carry through. Producers assumed her royal poise would translate into calm. And her publicists believed that decades of carefully managed public appearances had trained her to navigate scrutiny effortlessly. None of them predicted the volume, the intensity, or the unpredictability of what happened next. From the moment the first disagreement occurred, Meghan's emotional response accelerated. Words became sharper, gestures more pronounced, and tension began radiating outward. People on set felt it. Phones captured it. Security noticed it. And the film, designed to be a controlled, precise narrative experience, became secondary to the unfolding drama. But it wasn't just the stress of the moment. There were underlying dynamics at play. Competitive tensions with co-stars. Concerns about creative input being ignored. Anxiety about being overshadowed. Fear of failure. Pressure from advisors and legal teams insisting on her involvement in decision-making. All of these factors combined into a perfect storm. And storms, when unleashed, do not discriminate. It was during this storm that Meghan's focus shifted from performance to confrontation. Every small comment, every logistical suggestion, every perceived slight became a trigger. And when triggers accumulate unchecked, they explode. Suddenly, what had been manageable became chaos. Voices rose. Directions were challenged. Hands gestured in frustration. Security, initially peripheral, became central. Phones recorded. Cameras captured. And Meghan, caught in the whirlwind, expressed her fury with every ounce of energy she had. Yet, as explosive as the scene was, it also contained a tragic irony. Every attempt to assert control, to dominate the narrative, to reclaim professional authority, only heightened the perception of volatility. The very traits that Meghan believed would demonstrate her strength became the source of fear, speculation, and headlines. And here's the twist that most people overlook. In Hollywood, perception often outweighs reality. The narrative that emerges from chaos is rarely the one you intend. The footage of Meghan's outburst, the recordings of her words, the testimony of witnesses, these became artifacts that would be interpreted, dissected, and analyzed endlessly. All of which raises the inevitable question: can someone truly orchestrate their comeback while also navigating the unpredictability of human emotion under extreme pressure? For Meghan Markle, the answer was about to be revealed, in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. And as the day unfolded, as cameras rolled, as voices clashed, one fact became undeniable. The return of Meghan Markle to acting would not be measured by her performance in a single scene. It would be measured by her ability to manage the storm she had created, and the storm wasn't finished yet. Because if you think the hallway outburst was the climax, you are only scratching the surface. Something far more consequential was waiting behind the cameras. Something that would affect not just her role and close personal friends, but her reputation, her relationships, and her career trajectory. Have you ever seen someone flip a room with a single sentence? That was the question circulating through Amazon MGM studios the moment Meghan Markle locked eyes with the director. It wasn't just a disagreement. It wasn't even a minor conflict. According to multiple crew members, it was the collision of two forces: her unwavering demand for control and his insistence on a professional boundary. And when those two collided, the result was chaos. The director, a seasoned veteran with decades of experience on high-profile productions, had handled temperamental actors before. Stars who threw tantrums, stars who complained about lighting, stars who wanted more creative input than their contracts allowed. But Meghan was different. Meghan wasn't just a star. She wasn't just influential. She carried with her a lifetime of public scrutiny, a brand forged in headlines, and a confidence that was almost unassailable. Yet, confidence has its limits. And when that limit was reached, it erupted. It started innocently enough, a suggestion about her blocking during one scene. A minor adjustment that would help the camera capture the subtle nuances of the moment. Nothing confrontational, nothing personal. But to Meghan, it felt like an intrusion, a questioning of her capability to inhabit the character she had been preparing for. "You're going too far," she said, her voice calm at first, but with an edge that made everyone pause. "I know what I'm doing. I don't need your direction." The director, surprised, attempted to clarify. "I'm only suggesting a small change. It'll make your performance more natural on camera." Natural. That word ignited something in Meghan. Natural implied she wasn't already perfect, that someone else needed to intervene to improve her performance, that someone else knew better. Her voice rose. "Natural? I've been preparing for this role longer than you've been on this set. Don't tell me how to move. Don't tell me how to act. I know what works." The hallway seemed to shrink as her energy expanded. Crew members stepped back instinctively, sensing the tension growing like a storm about to break. The director raised his hands, a gesture of de-escalation, trying to maintain authority without provoking further anger. But Meghan wasn't listening. She never intended to listen. She was focused, entirely, on asserting control. Every word, every gesture, every glance was a statement. "I am in charge. I am competent. I am untouchable." And yet, her intensity had an unintended effect. Instead of asserting authority, it created a feedback loop. The director, now defensive, responded with firmness. "I'm not challenging you personally. I'm guiding the scene so it works for the camera. That's my job." But to Meghan, this sounded like dismissal. She interpreted it as undermining, as questioning her expertise. And when you combine high-stakes ambition, simmering insecurity, and the pressure to perform under public scrutiny, the smallest perceived slight can become the spark that ignites a fire. Her voice escalated. Short sentences punctuated with sharp inflections. Words layered with emotion. Every syllable carried the weight of years of expectation, judgment, and anticipation. "I don't need guidance. I don't need advice. I've handled more scrutiny than anyone on this set could imagine. Do not tell me how to do my job. Crew members looked at each other, eyes wide. They had seen arguments before, yes. They had seen diva moments, celebrity tantrums. But there was something different here. Something raw. Something that felt dangerously close to losing control. And the irony? Meghan knew everyone was watching. Cameras, phones, eyes. All eyes were on her. The very thing she wanted to control, her image, her narrative, was now slipping through her fingers. Every word she yelled, every gesture she made, was evidence for anyone paying attention. The director, trying to regain composure, made a crucial misstep. He raised his voice. Listen, this isn't personal. We're trying to make this work for everyone. To Meghan, raising a voice was escalation. A challenge. A confrontation. And once the confrontation began, there was no stopping it. She leaned forward slightly, her presence overwhelming. Not personal. Everything is personal when you question me. I have carried more scrutiny, more judgment, more pressure than anyone on this set could even imagine. Do not speak to me like I am inexperienced. The hallway seemed to vibrate with the intensity of their exchange. Crew members tried to mediate. Assistants positioned themselves between them. Props were moved. Phones discreetly began recording the escalating conflict. It was during this exchange that Meghan's full emotional spectrum became visible. Anger, frustration, and pride intermingled with fear and desperation. Fear that her comeback would fail. Fear that she wasn't being understood. Fear that she had to prove herself. Not just to the director, not just to the crew, but to the entire world. And then came the critical moment. The first pushback that Meghan didn't anticipate. A junior assistant, trying to calm the situation, suggested, "Maybe we can try it your way and see how it works?" That sentence, though innocent in intent, was misinterpreted as condescension. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Her voice cut sharply. "No, do not speak to me like that. Do not. You don't know what you're talking about. Stay out of this." It was the spark. The moment when simmering tension became full-blown confrontation. Security, still in the periphery, recognized the signs. They had seen this before. The rising voice, the physical gestures, the tightening of jaw and hands. When Meghan began pointing, stepping closer, and gesturing emphatically toward the director, they knew intervention was imminent. Crew members whispered among themselves. "We've never seen her like this. This isn't just anger. This is something else. Watch out. It's about to get physical." And then it happened. The director, attempting to regain control, suggested a compromise. "Let's take a break, Meghan. Step back. Calm down." To Meghan, that suggestion was humiliation. A public assertion that she had lost control. She erupted further, shouting words that were sharp, direct, and laden with emotion. She criticized the director's vision, his competence, and even the judgment of the crew standing nearby. The hallway became a battlefield. Words flew. Emotions spiked. People flinched. Phones recorded. Security stepped in closer. You could feel the fear, one witness recalled. Not fear of Meghan herself, but fear of the eruption. The energy in the room was like a storm that could hit at any second. Then came the final, unforgettable moment in that clash. Meghan, refusing to back down, stepped so close to the director that a physical confrontation seemed inevitable. Security, now fully engaged, moved forward, hands raised in protective positioning, ready to guide her away if necessary. But Meghan was relentless. She shouted one last sentence directly at him, a line so piercing, so personal, that it silenced the room for a heartbeat. Crew members froze. Phones captured the words. Cameras recorded the moment. Witnesses knew immediately this clash would define the day, and possibly her comeback. And then, as suddenly as it escalated, it paused. Meghan, realizing security had positioned themselves firmly, allowed herself to be guided toward the exit. Her anger had not subsided, but the tactical retreat was necessary. Yet, as dramatic as this moment was, it was only the beginning. Because this clash, this battle of wills, was not contained to that hallway. It would ripple through the set, through Amazon MGM's offices, through Hollywood gossip channels, and into every corner where Meghan Markle's name carried weight. Every word spoken, every gesture made, every expression captured on phone or camera would become part of the narrative, a narrative she had tried so hard to control. And the question that remains, Can a comeback survive when the very person attempting it becomes the headline for chaos, conflict, and confrontation? Have you ever wondered what it feels like to watch chaos unfold in front of you and know there's nothing you can do to stop it? That was the sentiment running through the minds of Amazon MGM crew members as Meghan Markle's meltdown escalated. For those on set, the events were more than just an actor losing her temper. They were a high-stakes spectacle, a collision of ego, ambition, and raw emotion that transformed a routine production day into an unforgettable, almost surreal experience. The first thing witnesses noticed was the intensity of Meghan's presence. Even before she raised her voice, there was an energy that demanded attention. A crew member, who wished to remain anonymous, described it this way. When she walked onto the set that morning, it was like the air itself changed. You could feel the tension coiling in her steps, the way she scanned the room like she was assessing everyone's worth. People instinctively straightened up. It was magnetic, but terrifying. Other crew members noted subtle behavioral cues that hinted at an impending eruption. The tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers flexed against her blazer, the rapid, calculated blinking of her eyes. You could tell she was holding back, one assistant said. But everyone knew she was building towards something. It was only a matter of time before it happened. And then it did. What followed was a combination of words and gestures that the crew described as almost cinematic. Meghan's voice sliced through the air, punctuated with sharp inflections that made each syllable feel like a command. "Do not tell me how to act," she reportedly yelled at one point. "I've been preparing for this longer than anyone on this set." Witnesses recall the director trying to mediate, hands raised, tone calm. But Meghan interpreted every word as a challenge, every gesture as a slight. She wasn't just angry, a crew member said. She was defiant. Every movement was calculated to assert control, to make sure everyone knew she was in charge. And yet, you could see fear behind the anger. Fear that if she lost this moment, her comeback would falter. Phones discreetly recorded the chaos as it unfolded. Multiple crew members, some on their own initiative and some instructed to capture the moment for safety purposes, lifted their devices. What was initially a minor clash over blocking and camera angles evolved into a full-blown confrontation. Security radios buzzed in the background as personnel moved closer to anticipate escalation. One cameraman described the scene. It was like watching a storm. Words flying, people ducking behind props, assistants trying to mediate. Every angle had a different perspective. Every sound carried weight. And then you noticed the silence in the room when she made eye contact with someone specific. The hallway just stopped breathing for a second. A makeup artist who had worked with high-profile talent for years said it was unlike anything she had seen. "I've been on sets with stars who throw fits, actors who demand attention. But this was different." Meghan wasn't performing for the camera. She was raw. She was herself. And she wasn't just yelling. She was trying to assert herself, to prove something, and it scared everyone. The chaos also revealed fractures among the crew. Some sided with Meghan, feeling she was justified in her reactions. Others were shocked, feeling the behavior was unprofessional. Whispered debates erupted in corners as assistants and junior crew members tried to process the events. "We were all talking under our breath," one insider explained. Everyone knew this was going to make headlines. Everyone knew someone was recording. And we all wondered, will this ruin her comeback? Several witnesses pointed to the precise moment when Meghan's energy became overwhelming. A co-star, attempting to diffuse tension, reportedly made a light-hearted remark. What was intended as humor or camaraderie was taken as a personal attack. She froze, stared, and then the words just came out, said one bystander. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't controlled. They were her response to the fear and frustration she'd been holding all morning. The physicality of her gestures also caught people off guard. Hands pointed, arms flailed, steps advanced toward the director in a way that felt threatening but not violent. Crew members instinctively created space, some stepping back, some crouching behind equipment. It was instinct, a lighting technician said. You react to energy like that. You sense it. And you know, if you get in the way, you could get caught in it. Security personnel, having observed similar situations with other actors and high-profile individuals, moved in a measured, deliberate manner. They weren't trying to escalate, a security officer told an insider. They were positioning themselves to guide her safely out if things got out of control. And when she refused to back down, that positioning became critical. Multiple crew members later reflected on the emotional undertones of the scene. Some were frightened. Some were fascinated. Some were concerned about how this would be interpreted publicly. A costume designer noted, "It was mesmerizing and horrifying at the same time. You couldn't look away, but you also didn't want to be part of it." Every emotion in the room was amplified because of who she is, what she represents, and what this moment meant for her career. And that is precisely what made this situation so unprecedented. The witnesses' accounts weren't just about what they saw, they were about what they felt. The hallway was charged, the air heavy. Every step, every breath, every word contributed to an atmosphere that was almost tangible. Crew members described the aftermath of the outburst in vivid terms. Phones still recording, the hallway silent but tense, Meghan being escorted by security toward the exit. The expressions on her face shifted from fury to disbelief to realization. She knew everyone had seen. She knew the footage existed. And she knew that the narrative was no longer hers to control. One assistant described the final seconds before she left. She was screaming, pointing, and then suddenly she stopped. It was like she realized she was being recorded. And in that instant, she became aware that this day, this hallway, this confrontation would define her return to acting more than any scene could. Another witness added, "People talk about diva moments, about celebrities losing control. But this was different. Meghan wasn't acting out. She was reacting to everything she's been through, everything she's trying to prove, and everything she fears losing. It was raw, emotional, and unfiltered. And everyone who saw it knew it wasn't going away anytime soon." The recordings would later circulate in whispers among staff, eventually leaking to media outlets. But the crew's first-hand accounts painted a fuller picture than any viral clip could capture. Every detail, from the subtle gestures to the volume shifts, from the pacing of her steps to the precise timing of her glances, added layers to a story that would soon dominate headlines. Direct audience question. Can you imagine being caught in a situation where every word you say, every movement you make, could be scrutinized, shared, and debated endlessly? That's exactly what happened to Meghan in those moments. The combined accounts revealed more than anger. They revealed a woman under pressure, attempting to reclaim agency, attempting to assert herself in a world that constantly judged her, and attempting to prove she could succeed on her own terms. But even with all the emotional insight, one detail stood out among the testimonies: the unexpected escalation. Nobody anticipated just how quickly a minor disagreement could turn into a hallway standoff. And nobody anticipated the final sentence she uttered as she was being guided away. A sentence so pointed, so explosive, it left the crew and security speechless. This was the moment that would be replayed in their minds, discussed over and over, and eventually dissected by audiences around the world. And it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Because the true fallout, the one that would affect her career, her reputation, and her comeback trajectory, was only beginning to unfold. Have you ever witnessed someone lose control so completely that the room itself seems to bend under the weight of their anger? That's exactly what crew members and security personnel at Amazon MGM Studios experienced the day Meghan Markle's simmering tension erupted into a full-blown verbal storm. What had started as minor disagreements about blocking, script adjustments, and camera angles had escalated into a chaotic, almost cinematic scene of fury, confrontation, and raw emotion, a moment that no one present would ever forget. By the time the shouting began, Meghan had reached a point where reason, patience, and diplomacy no longer existed. Her voice, which moments earlier had been sharp but controlled, now carried the intensity of someone pushed to her absolute limit. Every syllable was loaded with emotion, frustration, fear, pride, and anger, all tangled together into a volatile mix. Crew members recall the first words that set the outburst in motion. One insider described them as a volley of sentences aimed at everyone around her: the director, the assistants, even the camera crew. People froze as the hallway echoed with accusations, demands, and scathing remarks. The air was thick, tense, and almost electric with anticipation. She didn't just speak, one witness said. She projected. Every word hit like a hammer. You could feel it. You could feel the force of her anger vibrating in the walls. But the real shock came when the obscenity started. Words that no one expected to hear from a duchess, from someone so polished, so publicly conscious of her image, spilled out in rapid succession. Short, punchy lines. Sharp, unmistakable. Words that conveyed not just anger but defiance, power, and a refusal to be challenged. One crew member, who later spoke anonymously, described the moment. She was yelling. She was pointing. She was walking toward people. And then, out of nowhere, the words just came, and they were words that made even the most hardened crew members take a step back. What made this scene so extraordinary wasn't just the language she used. It was the layering of emotion behind it. Every insult, every sharp retort, every pointed phrase carried the weight of personal stakes. This wasn't random anger. It wasn't an uncontrolled outburst for attention. This was someone defending her territory, defending her reputation, defending her comeback, and doing so in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. Direct audience question. Can you imagine being in a room where every word you hear feels like it's coming from a force of nature, unstoppable, unpredictable, and terrifyingly intense? That's what it was like. The crew also noticed the shift in her physicality. Her gestures became more pronounced, her steps more deliberate, her finger pointing almost surgical in its precision. The director, trying desperately to maintain calm, raised his hands in a classic de-escalation posture. Meghan ignored it entirely. She wasn't there to negotiate. She was there to assert dominance. And then came the confrontation with the co-star. According to multiple witnesses, the co-star attempted to interject with humor, attempting to diffuse tension. But Meghan interpreted it as mockery, a slight, an attack. And when she responded, the hallway seemed to crack under the sheer force of her words. "You don't understand," she shouted, her voice echoing through the corridor. "Do not speak to me like that. You have no idea what it's like to be in my position. You have no idea what I've been through. Don't even try to tell me anything." Crew members described the scene as chaotic but also mesmerizing. There was fear, yes, but also a kind of awe at the intensity of her presence. Assistants instinctively moved to mediate, but every attempt to calm the situation only seemed to amplify the volume, the energy, the drama. The breaking point, according to witnesses, came when Meghan felt challenged in a way she couldn't ignore. Whether it was a questioning glance, a minor correction, or a gesture from the director, it triggered a rapid escalation. Words turned into rapid-fire sentences, sentences turned into shouted demands, and shouted demands turned into full-blown verbal attacks. "You think you can control me?" she screamed. "You think anyone here has the right to tell me what to do? I am in charge. I decide what happens. Do you hear me? I decide." The crew recoiled. Phones went up. Cameras clicked. Every moment was recorded, every syllable captured. Security, already alert, moved closer. But Meghan was unstoppable. She was moving with intention, each step forward a declaration of her refusal to be subdued. Witnesses described the hallway as a charged arena. Lights hummed. Cameras whirred. The sound of her voice ricocheted off the walls, magnified by the enclosed space. People whispered, some in fear, some in disbelief, some in anticipation of what would come next. One assistant recounted the near moment of physical escalation. She stepped so close to the director at one point that we all flinched. You could feel the tension in the air, like it was about to snap. Security had to step in, gently but firmly, to prevent it from turning into something physical. And yet, Meghan did not back down. Not for a second. Her anger, fueled by perceived slights, accumulated pressure, and personal stakes, reached its apex. Every word, every gesture, every glance was a signal that she would not be ignored. She was claiming the room, commanding attention, asserting authority, and defending her comeback with every ounce of energy she possessed. Direct audience question. Have you ever felt that combination of fear and fascination? Watching someone unleash everything they've been holding in, and knowing you're witnessing something historic, something unforgettable? That's exactly what it was like. The hallway was now a stage. Meghan the central figure. Every crew member, every assistant, every actor a witness to a performance that was both real and raw. And in the center of it all, her voice carried over every sound, every whisper, every gasp. Then, the most astonishing moment came. Witnesses say she shouted a final line, a verbal bomb that silenced the hallway for a heartbeat. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just profanity. It was a statement, a declaration that whatever happened next would be remembered. And it was captured. Phones recorded it. Cameras captured it. Every expression, every word, every gesture preserved for posterity. And as she was finally guided by security toward the exit, Meghan's face betrayed a mix of fury, disbelief, and realization. She knew the footage existed. She knew the world might see it. And she knew that the day, and perhaps her comeback, would never be the same. Direct audience question. How do you handle a moment when every word, every movement, every ounce of emotion you release could define your future? Meghan Markle found out the hard way. And yet, even after the shouting ended, the fallout had only begun. The hallway that had contained the storm now carried the echoes of a meltdown that would ripple far beyond Amazon MGM studios. Witnesses, recordings, and whispers would spread. Headlines would erupt. And the story of Meghan Markle's return to acting would be defined, not by her performance, but by her unfiltered, explosive presence in a single hallway. Have you ever watched someone get escorted out of a building and realize the person being led isn't just upset? They're a storm you can't stop? That's the moment Amazon MGM security realized just how serious Meghan Markle's meltdown had become. What started as a heated exchange had escalated into a full-blown confrontation, and it was no longer just a verbal fight. It was a matter of safety, control, and containment. The crew had been shocked. The director had been stunned. And security had been alerted, but nothing could have fully prepared them for what happened next. Security personnel are trained for high-pressure situations. They handle celebrities, volatile artists, tense events, and chaotic crowds. But Meghan Markle wasn't just any celebrity. She was royalty, a public figure whose every action is scrutinized, analyzed, and broadcast. She carried influence, power, and unpredictability all in one package. Escorting her would not be the same as handling any ordinary disturbance. According to multiple sources, security's initial response was measured. They positioned themselves strategically around the hallway, anticipating escalation without provoking it. Their radios clicked with quiet urgency. Their eyes scanned the room, tracking Meghan's movements, assessing threats, and preparing to intervene if necessary. You could feel the tension shift the moment they stepped in, said a crew member who observed the scene. It wasn't like someone finally showing authority. It was like the air thickened. Everyone instinctively knew something big was about to happen. At first, Meghan resisted. She argued. She shouted. She gestured with her hands, stepping toward the director, the co-star, and the crew. Security didn't move aggressively. They didn't restrain her physically. Their goal was simple: de-escalate without escalating, maintain control without confrontation. But Meghan's intensity was unparalleled. She was vocal, assertive, and unyielding. Each step, each word, each pointed glance amplified the chaos around her. Crew members instinctively took cover behind equipment or camera rigs, capturing the moment but avoiding proximity. Phones were raised, recording the unfolding storm. Direct audience question. Can you imagine being in that hallway, the walls seemingly closing in as a high-profile figure's rage fills every inch of space? How would you react if someone with that much authority, reputation, and emotional energy was heading toward you, furious and unstoppable? The security team recognized a turning point. Meghan was no longer merely venting frustration. She was escalating, and the escalation was now physical in nature. Her movements became faster, more deliberate. Hands pointed sharply. She stepped closer to the director with a pace that was measured but intimidating. Every step conveyed defiance and authority. The team moved closer. Their approach was deliberate, professional, and coordinated. One officer positioned himself slightly behind Meghan, monitoring her movements while remaining ready to intervene. Another stationed himself to her side, creating a buffer between her and the others. A third officer positioned at the front, gently guiding the direction of her movement without touching her. It was a delicate dance. The goal was not confrontation. It was containment. But containment with someone like Meghan Markle is a high-wire act. One misstep, one perceived slight, and the situation could have escalated further. Witnesses described the scene as almost cinematic. They weren't restraining her, one insider explained. They were guiding her like she was a storm you had to funnel through a corridor without letting it destroy everything in its path. It was remarkable, but also terrifying to watch. And then came the verbal back and forth that made the situation so volatile. Meghan wasn't retreating. She wasn't calming. She continued to assert her authority, shouting at multiple individuals in rapid succession. The hallway reverberated with her voice, bouncing off walls, echoing like an amplifier of raw emotion. Security maintained their positions, keeping her moving without escalating the situation. They used subtle cues, shifts in body language, gentle placement of hands to redirect, and verbal guidance aimed at de-escalation. Every move required precision. Every step required anticipation. One wrong action, and the confrontation could turn physical, embarrassing, or potentially dangerous. Direct audience question: how do you guide someone like Meghan Markle, powerful, influential, emotionally charged, without igniting an even larger storm? What strategies do you use when calm reasoning has no effect, and every word seems to escalate rather than soothe? Crew members observed the struggle between Meghan and security with mixed emotions. Some were fearful, some astonished, some captivated. One assistant said, "You didn't know whether to intervene or just step back and watch." Every gesture she made had intent. Every word was a statement. And security was walking a tightrope, trying to contain it all without causing more chaos. Meghan, according to witnesses, continued to verbalize her frustrations. She pointed out perceived slights, challenged authority, and demanded recognition. It wasn't just anger. It was a declaration of autonomy, an insistence that she remained in control of her narrative, even as the physical guidance of security suggested otherwise. And then, as the escort continued, Meghan's energy reached its peak. She shouted a line, captured by multiple phones, that stunned everyone present. It was sharp, personal, and loaded with emotional weight. Even security, trained for high-pressure scenarios, had to pause for a heartbeat to process the intensity of her declaration. By this point, the hallway had transformed. It was no longer merely a passageway. It was a stage, a battlefield, a dramatic scene unfolding in real time. The crew and assistants moved to the sides, out of immediate range, while cameras and phones documented every angle. Every expression, every inflection, every gesture was preserved for posterity. Security maintained their calm but firm presence. Their strategy was clear. Escort Meghan out safely, prevent physical escalation, and ensure that the situation did not spiral further. Every subtle motion, every calculated step, was aimed at channeling the storm without stopping it abruptly, a technique described by one officer as containing energy without suppression. And yet, even as she was guided toward the exit, Meghan's face betrayed a range of emotions: fury, disbelief, realization, and fear. She was fully aware of the optics, of the recordings, of the witnesses. She knew this incident would not remain private, and she also knew that the hallway confrontation would define the early stages of her comeback. Direct audience question: how do you think it feels to be escorted out by security while being fully conscious that every step, every movement, every word will be dissected by the world? Could you maintain composure under that kind of scrutiny? The moment Meghan was guided out of the hallway marked the culmination of the first stage of the incident. Security had successfully moved her, maintained safety, and prevented a physical escalation. But the emotional and public fallout was just beginning. The footage captured by phones and cameras would soon circulate. Observers' accounts would leak, and the narrative of her Hollywood return would forever be linked to this extraordinary incident. And the final, lingering question remained: what consequences would this escalation have for her career, her reputation, and her relationship with Amazon MGM? Did Meghan Markle know the storm was coming before it even started? That's the question insiders have been asking since the Amazon MGM hallway incident. Because long before the screaming, the pointing, and the shouting, there was a hidden meeting, a private gathering of key production staff that set the stage for everything that would follow. And according to multiple sources, what Meghan overheard, intentionally or not, planted the seeds for the explosive confrontation that would soon erupt. The morning had started like any other. Lights flickered on. Cameras hummed. Assistants hurried down narrow hallways with clipboards. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with makeup and set paint. But behind closed doors, executives and producers had convened in a small conference room to discuss concerns about the day's shoot. What began as a routine coordination meeting quickly turned into a discussion of Meghan's behavior, creative input, and potential challenges on set. The meeting included producers, directors, Amazon MGM executives, and several senior crew members. It wasn't meant to be leaked, observed, or heard outside the room. But fate, and perhaps Meghan's own curiosity, had other plans. Insiders say the discussion was focused on logistics, scheduling, and workflow. The kind of details that often frustrate actors if they feel excluded or undermined. But certain comments, intended as neutral or managerial, struck Meghan differently when she overheard them. Phrases like, "We need to manage her input carefully," or "she's unpredictable and could slow down the shoot," were floating through the room. To any neutral observer, these were just production.